Welcome, everyone, to episode 36 of Ty's Training, Talking with My Dad. This is the week of November 24th. I'm Ty, and here, as always, with my wonderful father and co-host, Mr. C, aka Tim Andrews, for another look at life and training in this giant multi-year project we are calling Project Himalaya. I am currently doing this from our car here in Laguna Santa Rosa, Chile. This is like one of the few quiet places where I could get out of the wind. So I'm actually kind of amazed we can do this because we definitely wouldn't have been able to a couple of years ago. But yeah, I'm excited to be here chatting. We have our satellite internet up and running, so hopefully we can get through this without too much. Mr. C, how are you doing over there?
I'm doing great, and because I'm in sort of a regular place and comfortable, although it's snowing like crazy today. So very different environment from the high desert of
Yep.
Chile. And it is amazing that we can even do this, and that the thing between Nepal and this and other places, crazy places you've been, it's quite something that we can pull this off. So it's really interesting.
It's true.
Yeah.
We've done this
hmm
from a lot of different places now. Everest Base Camp, from Kare, from here. Yeah, all over the world. Places in Ecuador. Yeah, we're
Yep.
the multinational podcast empire now.
Yep. Indeed. Okay, well, let's get to it and start with the numbers. What were your totals for this week?
Yeah, so this week, kind of like getting into it finally, getting into a little bit of a routine, and the totals we had were 118 kilometers, so that's just about 75 miles, 22, almost 23 hours of training time, and 10,435 meters of vert, and a whole bunch of that came in one day, which we'll talk about. But Mr. C, I'll let you kind of do our intro and get into the actual questions here.
Okay, yeah. So it's really been Where's Waldo? I guess that's not the right one. It's more like for those who
Where
are
in the
of
world
a
is Carmen
certain
Sandiego?
age. Yeah, exactly. Where in the world is Carmen Sandiego? So you've had quite the week. You've been on multiple time zones and continents. Starting with the dress rehearsal, which you're going to talk about momentarily, for the Everesting event, not Everest, but Everesting event
Everesting.
coming up in a few weeks. And then you flew from there in Colorado down to Chile to spend some time at altitude, where you are now, which is Laguna Santa Rosa, with some very big days already. So let's walk through the whole week from that first day when you did the big treadmill session to the travel down to Chile to your first 6,000-meter peak. So let's start with Monday's enormously massive, unbelievable treadmill session at your friend the Staley's, over 5,400 meters. So again, for our US and English friends who think in feet, that's what, 16, 17,000 feet,
Um,
something like that.
yeah,
A, a
17,700 feet.
17.7. So that's bigger than most mountains in the world already. Um, so it's a staggering amount, if you think about what the Colorado peaks in the Rockies are about 14,000 feet. So that's another 3,000 feet on top of that. So these are big. That's a lot of vert. Anyway, so walk us. What was your idea? What were you trying to accomplish? Why was it so important to do it there and then and on that particular machine?
So, if you missed last week's episode, go back and listen to that because we announced we're doing this big event on December 21st in Boulder, which is I will try to break the world record for climbing the height of Everest on a treadmill, which is 8,848 meters. So, yes, 5,400 meters is a lot, but it's still 3,400 meters less than I need to do a month from now. So that was the idea, was to do basically a dress rehearsal kind of time trial workout for that event. And specifically, the Staleys, who are very good friends of mine now, they live in Colorado. I was staying at their house, and they have a treadmill that they have offered to let us use for the event itself. So this is important because I got to literally use the machine that I'm going to be using in the record attempt event itself, which will be at the La Sportiva store down in Boulder, which is actually a few thousand feet lower, which is really nice because the Staleys live up in the foothills of the Rockies, and I think it's about 8,500 feet up there. So if anything, it was probably a little bit harder just because of that extra altitude than it will be in Sportiva in the store. But yeah, the idea was really we just wanted to kind of get some more data. I had a basic idea of how quick I might be able to do this, but I've never done anything like this in terms of such a long, continuous thing just on a treadmill. So I really just kind of wanted to test it and see how it would feel and figure out, okay, are there any, little weird things that pop up, any specific kinds of soreness or weakness that I felt that I could address in this month or so that I have between that dress rehearsal and when I'm actually going to do the record attempt, because, there is time there. So I did find some little things. I found, my feet got pretty sore. I found my hamstrings got a little sore. So I have some things to work on. And it was very, I'd say, a successful run, a little bit mind numbing, but that's kind of what I expected. And I was really glad to have the opportunity to do that. And now have time to kind of go and train a little bit more before I go back and try and do the whole thing.
Great. Yes, and you told me this story that you actually used your phone or something because you discovered you couldn't figure out why it was so hard what you were doing on when you first tried it out, and you discovered that the garage at their house actually has a 2% incline,
Yeah.
and so that threw all your paces off. So explain to us mere mortals how much that actually matters. I mean, you're already at a 20% grade, so now you're plus or minus 2 degrees, right? So 18% or whatever, and over 5 hours. How much impact does that really have, and how did you adjust all of your paces and things?
It's funny. I actually noticed it more when I was doing a little bit of flat running, just like easy jogging on their treadmill. And I noticed, gosh, my heart rate seems really high at this effort. And I literally wrote the night before this. I was like, man, something is either miscalibrated in this machine or else I'm like really sick or something because this doesn't make any sense. And then the next morning, yeah, I have like a little just level app on my phone and just put it on the floor of the garage and it's like, oh yeah, it's about 2% uphill, 2.1% or something. I was like, that makes sense. Okay. So really because I usually will run at 2% when I'm anywhere like at a gym or anything because that kind of simulates better running outside. And so really I was running at 4%. So the difference between 2 and 4% running is actually pretty significant. It's the difference between having it feel kind of flat and having it feel like you're running up a little hill. And when you're at altitude, running uphill is even harder versus running flat. So that was really where I noticed it. And then in terms of the higher percentage vert stuff, the steeper stuff, the difference between 20 and 22% is 10%. Like that's a lot. 10% when we're talking about anything kind of an elite sport, 10% is like an ocean, right? So like, we like kill ourselves over 1%. And so, yeah, when you take 10% off, suddenly it's like, oh my gosh, yeah, this is so much easier. Like, my goodness. And so that was kind of nice because I was a little bit stressed out. I was like, oh man, maybe I'm not reacting to the altitude that well. I think we talked about last week, I'd been at sea level for a really long time, like the longest I've been in a couple of years. I was like, oh, maybe this is going to be kind of rough. And that was a really nice thing to figure out because it was, okay, like once I kind of made those adjustments to the machines, I was like, all right, then everything kind of makes sense now.
Okay, great. Well, that's a good thing to figure out then. It's a relief, I'm sure. Um, so you went into this, I won't say per usual. Actually, I'll say per usual. With a very systematic engineering, nerdy kind of approach of exactly how you were going to do it over exactly what period, starting at 3.0 to 3.1 miles per hour, gradually building to 3.8 miles per hour by the end. So, but one of the things that I think has really, I've noticed over your career is the difference between your ability to be disciplined in these long and difficult uh, exercises and efforts in going out much more slowly than you want to. And I remember
Yeah.
some of the early races you ran where you just, oh yeah, I wasn't going up that fast. And then you just blew up at the end. And eventually you learned how to, nope, I got to go way slower than I thought. So talk about that discipline that's required to hold back when you know you have a very long race, in this case, 5 hours or something ahead of you.
Well, really, I was thinking about it as, an 8 to 10 hour event because that's what we're shooting for in the actual record attempt itself. So it's not even a 5 hour
Hmm.
thing. It's really a 10 hour thing. And the idea that I had was I like I said before, I really part of this was I wanted to get a lot of data. And so I wanted to see, okay, how is my heart rate going to be at a couple of these various speeds? And again, the treadmill is at 20%. So I can't remember the exact numbers, but I think 3.1 miles per hour is about 5 kilometers an hour. And that was going to put us at like maybe a 9-ish hour finish time. And so that was kind of where I started just like set it and forget it and kind of see what my heart rate did, because I wanted to see, is it basically going to plateau and stay steady, or is it going to climb a little bit as I get a little bit fatigued? So that was part of it, was just gathering data early on, and like you said, it really does take some discipline, because honestly, it's way more engaging to move quicker. It's pretty boring, and it's like boring and uncomfortable at the same time. It's like the worst possible combination, because especially after a couple of hours, it's not it doesn't feel totally easy. It's not just like walking down the street, walking your dog. It's your feet start to hurt, your muscles start to hurt, your joints start to hurt, because you're just doing the same exact repetitive motion over and over again. But it's not hard enough aerobically, cardiovascularly, at least for me, that it feels engaging in the same way that running a marathon would, or running a hard interval workout. So it's almost like the worst of both worlds. So that's where I honestly will look for like distractions in the form of literally sometimes reading a book if it's really early and I'm going slow, or I put a movie on at some point and watch an entire movie, things like that, where those early hours, literally the early hours, like we used to talk about the early miles in a race, now we talk about the early hours, you really do want to feel bored. And that was the idea. So I've kind of embraced that concept, especially with longer things, where a lot of the time, the first third, half, even 2/3 of whatever you're trying to do, it's not necessarily going to feel easy, but it shouldn't feel like you're really pushing. It should feel boring almost.
Uh-huh. Okay. And um, then let's talk about your fueling. So you ate an enormous amount, it looks like to me. Because we were talking originally, I remember a few months ago, maybe it was last year, about 300 calories an hour being a lot. And then you had been experimenting in Nepal and such with 400 plus calories an hour. This was 500 calories an hour. That is so much food. Well, so much calories and carbohydrates, mostly gummy candies. So you noticed your heart rate as you were doing this. You did notice that your heart rate was spiking, maybe 5 to 10 beats even, which for you is a lot. Um, so every time you ate. So what did you learn? And have you made any adjustments in terms of this relationship between all the things involved in eating, chewing and breathing and heart rate management over these really long efforts of many hours?
So first, to address the overall fueling idea and kind of the numbers there, I think one of the things that we've seen in general with sport and endurance sport in general is people across the board, cyclists, ultra runners, marathon runners, are just pushing more and more carbohydrates during events. And one of the things, I actually had a meeting with a sports nutritionist from Morton, which is my current nutrition sponsor, and I had a meeting with her last week. And one of the things that she was saying that's relatively new research is essentially that when you take in more and more carbohydrate, your body gets less efficient at processing, but it doesn't get so much less efficient that it makes up for the absolute value, like the amount that you're actually getting in, if that makes sense. So if you take in 400 calories an hour, let's just play with random numbers. If you take in 400 calories an hour, let's assume it's all carbohydrate. That's 100 grams of carbohydrate an hour. Let's just assume you can absorb all of that with 100% efficiency. Now, if you take in, say, 600 calories an hour, which is 150 grams of carbohydrate, you're not going to absorb all of it. But let's say you absorb 80% of that instead of 100%. That 80% is still going to be more than the 100 grams that you got taking 100 grams at
Yep.
100% efficiency. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So that's the idea, is like you're kind of playing with this idea there is a point of diminishing returns, and you're trying to get as close to that as possible, basically without making yourself sick. Because eventually you will just end up with like a big gob of, like undigested food in your stomach, which you don't want, especially when you're running. That's hard to do. The nice thing is, for ultra running and hiking and cycling, it's much easier on your gut because you're not literally running. A big one of the big factors of marathon running is the actual motion of running is
Yeah.
really disruptive to your digestion because you're
Yeah.
moving up and down and forward at very high speed. So that really messes with your GI system. Whereas for me, you know, hiking or jogging uphill at 3 to 4 miles an hour is like not a tremendous amount of motion for my body, so I can push a little bit more. Um, so that's the idea. And again, all of this stuff is kind of experiment of one for me, and just trying to figure out what works for me and what my body can tolerate. And this is one where I thought it's why not just see what I can do. And yeah, so that's the number that we ended up with. I wasn't really shooting for anything in particular. It was more just let's see how much I can kind of tolerate. And honestly, I had no stomach issues at all, so that was great. And then the second part of the question about the kind of breathing and heart rate and chewing and all that stuff, I think I literally was writing notes to myself during this, and the thing I wrote, I was like, heart rate spikes 5 to 10 BPM. Breathe, like exclamation point. And like I think that's part of it, is literally when I was chewing, I just wasn't breathing for like 10 seconds. And
Uh-huh.
especially doing this at, again, my friend's house at 8,500 feet, 2,600 meters or something. Um, like if you miss 5 breaths in a row or something, your body is going to start freaking out a little bit. So that was a big thing, was just, okay, especially on a treadmill, one of the benefits is you don't have to worry about grabbing a bottle off the side of the road, or putting, having everything in your vest. Like you can literally eat one chew at a time. You don't have to take like a huge handful of stuff like on Everest, where it's a huge pain to take the gel out of your pocket or take the packet of candy or whatever it is, and deal with that, like that motion. If anything, it's almost nicer to have something to do, like we just talked about boredom. It's almost nicer to have something to do. So I was finding myself, I would take a couple of minutes to eat a little bag of candy or something, but I would just put in like one little piece at a time, so then I could chew and breathe at the same time, and that seemed to work a lot better. So hopefully that also would just get better with better altitude acclimatization. But again, this is exactly the kind of like weird little thing that I probably wouldn't have thought about if I hadn't done that.
Yeah, the value of testing and experimenting. And it's there's a couple things to say here. One is um, you're absolutely right, being, a bit, as of an amateur molecular biologist, the uh and being of a certain age, there is all this talk about protein,
Hmm.
because the biggest problem for people my age and older is loss of muscle mass, basically loss of protein, lean muscle mass,
Yep.
and all the cascading effects that has. And it's exactly the same thing. So and there's some controversy about it, but not as much as people sometimes like to create for clickbait headlines. Because the reality is, yeah, you do lose muscle mass, and the problem is, as you get older, your molecular biological systems aren't as efficient. And so
Yep.
just as same basic idea, you have to eat more protein than you really need by quite a bit,
I see what you're saying.
because you're
Yeah.
not able to catalyze it as effectively. So,
Yep.
but it still helps. You eat more, you're going to waste more, but you're also going to get more because you're not wasting all of it. So you do have to help it. The other thing is bioavailability. When you said the big glob of stuff, I wonder if there's work or research into so bioavailability. What you really want is the carbohydrates in your cells. That's all you really want. If you could just
Hmm.
like push a button and get all those carbs in your cells, you would skip the eating process altogether. And
Totally.
part
Yep.
of what you're describing, again, for runners is really tough. And it's people talk about sloshing, but the real problem is that your body assumes when you're running, you don't want to be doing much else, because it assumes you're either in pursuit of food or in trying to get away from a predator. So it shuts down everything that doesn't have to do with the running, including your digestive system, because it doesn't want you to have to take a break while a saber-toothed tiger is chasing you. And
Yep.
so that's a problem. So I wonder if there is any research, or if you're aware of stuff, and because I know you've just experimented with different kinds of food to try and ease this process of getting it through your gut. Is there any work, do you know, from the big vendors or research or anywhere on trying to make the carbohydrates more bioavailable without so much stress on your digestive system?
So I don't know exactly. I know that one of the things that Morton, the company that I've been working with, has done that's different is they use what's called a hydrogel, where basically they encapsulate the sugar in a little gel. And what that does, you're way more of a molecular biologist than me. my understanding is that it passes from your stomach into your small intestine more efficiently, and so it doesn't get absorbed in your stomach, and instead it gets absorbed
Yep.
in your small intestine, which is a more
Yep.
efficient way to do
That's a
it.
common trick, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, because
So
your stomach is often the source of problems because your stomach
exactly.
tends to use a lot of very powerful acids and other things to break things down, and too much of that stuff can make you not feel well.
Yep.
Whereas your small intestine is much more efficient, and then you don't generate all this other stuff in your stomach in the first place. So yeah,
Yep.
very common trick with all sorts of stuff is to wrap them in a little bubble that only dissolves in your small intestine.
Yep.
Interesting. Okay. All right. So, next on the list, you noted that you had to restart the machine every once in a while because, it
Yeah, timed out.
just
That was
runs
kind of
out,
annoying.
gets tired and whatever, however we
Yeah.
want to anthropomorphize it. So how much of it, how difficult is that? How much of a disruption is that? Is it actually helpful because you get a little break, or does it like screw up your rhythm and your flow?
I think in this event, it, or at least on this day, it wasn't a big deal. It was kind of nice actually, because like I said, it was really boring, so it kind of gave me something to look forward to. Of like, okay, I'm gonna have like a 45-second break, and I can just kind of shake my legs out a little bit. I think if it were more like a fast running, like back when I did the half marathon record, then it would be a really big problem because first of all, even 30 or 60 seconds is a lot of time in a half marathon. That's only a little over an hour, versus in something that's 5 or 10 hours is 30 or 60 or 90 seconds doesn't matter. Hopefully, it shouldn't matter. Um, so yeah, in this case, I think it was totally fine. Knock on wood, we should have. There's a guy who's going to come and like do a calibration to make sure the treadmill is like record eligible and whatever. And he said he could basically disable that so that it'll just run indefinitely when we actually do the record attempt. So that'll be nice.
Oh, great.
Yep.
Okay. And then you mentioned this already, but let's go back and talk about your feet because you said fitness was no problem. You felt really good, even though this was, again, only a partial uh, attempt in the sense that, it was 5,400, not 8,800 meters, but still, it was a long run and you felt it went really well. But you did talk about your feet in particular, your hamstrings getting tired. So what are you going to do about that? Because, if you're as fit as you can be, but you can't walk, it's not going to help much, right?
Yeah, that's definitely true. I think for the feet, the big thing is I talked to Sportiva and actually met with their team like the next day. And so I have a size up shoe, and I think that will help a lot. I think my feet were getting a little bit swollen from, like I said, it's a super repetitive motion. And
Yep.
I've never done anything like that where you're just doing the exact same kind of thing for so long. Because usually, even an uphill thing like actual Everest or some of the big mountain stuff I've done, you still have varied terrain and you're taking slightly different steps. But here, you're basically landing on exactly the same square millimeter of your foot every single time. And it's not that much force compared to running, but when you take 50,000 steps or something, eventually it gets pretty sore. So I think yeah, having a bigger shoe will help. I can wear a little bit more of a padded sock to deal with that, and it'll just like allow for a little bit more of the swelling without it feeling so constricting. And then hamstrings definitely felt like they were getting pretty sore. So I've been doing some single leg deadlifts and basic hamstring exercises just to get a little bit more strength and mobility there, so that hopefully that feels a little bit better on record day. But honestly, none of it was like super terminal, and even the next day, it all felt fine. So I wouldn't say it was deal breaker stuff. It was more just things that I could do to make me feel a little bit more comfortable and hopefully make things move a little bit faster and more efficiently.
Okay. Let's hope so. And then, which you've done many times in many places, less than 24 hours after that enormous effort, you were on a plane, in this case, going to Chile. So, and I remember you used to do this at Leadville too. You'd run, ridiculous race at Leadville and then get on a plane like the next day to go fly to Chamonix for UTMB.
Yep.
And so what's the recovery strategy when you're trying to bounce back, but you're also forced to sit on planes for, 10, 12 plus hours at a time?
I think first of all, just fueling and recovering well immediately after, like that, 12 to 24-hour period right after anything is probably the most important. And David, the guy whose house I was staying at, he has an incredible setup in terms of having compression stuff, like cold bath, hot bath, sauna, like everything you can imagine. So taking that pretty seriously that day and fueling well. And then, during travel, I think one of the biggest travel hacks I know of, and I think you and I did a travel hack episode a while ago, is just like getting up and moving around as much as possible. Whether it's literally on the plane, I will sometimes, like, especially if it's a day flight and I'm not sleeping, I'll just set my watch alarm and just get up every 30 minutes and like go to the galley and just do some little squats or just walk up and down the aisle for 5 minutes. And I
Yeah.
find that kind of stuff to be really, really helpful. And same thing within the airport. Like I think I had like a 4 hour layover and I'll just go walk around and make some phone calls for an hour, as opposed to just sitting in a chair somewhere. So I think being mobile, moving around, and then, yeah, fueling and recovery in the immediate aftermath, those are the two biggest things I'd say.
Yep. And I will tell you that also helps me tremendously.
Yep.
Not that I'm running the kind of, but just, again, when you get to a certain age, you sit down for more than 30 minutes, your body just starts to get stiff and sore. So yeah, I do that, almost all the time when I travel, try and move as much as possible, even if it's just very briefly, a minute or two here and there. Hmm. Good advice. Okay, so you met your friend Tim Roberry in Santiago Airport, and you decided to go for a run in the parking garage. Who'd have thunk it?
It wasn't in the parking garage. It was like the loop that goes around the outside of the parking garage.
Okay, okay. Just so we're clear, outside of the parking garage, but
Outside. It was
near the
outside. It
parking
was
garage.
sunny. It was very nice. Yeah.
Okay. So tell us the difference between that being smart recovery work or two people who just can't stand to sit still when they're with each other.
um, no, I think that fits into kind of what we were just talking about. Neither of us were going out there to, set a PR or anything. Both of us had been traveling for a long time. We just gotten off red eye flights and we had, I don't know, four-ish hours again of layover in Santiago before we flew up here to Copiapó, which is the airport close to the Atacama here. And it was a beautiful day. We had our athletic clothes and we had plenty of time, and it was like, okay, let's go just do a little jog and shake the legs out a little bit. So I think, that to me is, it's taking care of the mind and the body, getting outside, getting some sun early in the morning, having a great light exercise with a good friend. Like those are all things to me that are super beneficial for the mind and the body. So yeah, I think, like, yes, you can joke and say like we are like addicted to exercise, which I think probably most people are. Maybe they just don't know it. Um, but at the end of the day, I think it was a nice way to spend a morning when we could have just been sitting in an airport terminal.
So on Thursday, you drove up to Laguna Santa Rosa, arriving at 3,800 meters. And after being in Colorado at 2,500 meters and doing that huge effort on the treadmill, how did your body feel that first night at a much higher altitude?
Honestly, it felt surprisingly good. I think I've surprised myself a little bit in general by how these altitude adjustments have seemed to be just kind of fine. After spending 2 months at sea level, I kind of expected I would get my butt kicked a little more going back up, but maybe there's just some kind of like lifetime memory that your body has of going up and down a lot. And, um, you know, once you've gone to 8,000 meters, it's like, whatever, 2,000, 3,000 meters is no big deal. So yeah, it was actually, it felt pretty much fine. Usually the first night is the roughest, and that's still a pretty big jump from, where I was in Colorado. But I remember that first night felt pretty good. The heart rate variability and resting heart rate overnight are the two that I kind of look at as indicators for adaptation, as well as just how I'm feeling. And then oxygen saturation is another one, but all those looked honestly pretty normal. So I don't really have a great explanation other than I've spent a lot of time at altitude and my body kind of remembers how to do it. And I'm not going to question it. It's just going fine. So
Yeah,
it's all good.
don't
Fingers
argue with it.
crossed. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, maybe there is some permanent adaptation going on. Who knows? Um, okay. And then once you got there, you on Friday was your first run, which was a big lollipop route. So uh, I'm going to come back to that for a second. On Pastillitos, is that the right way to
Yep.
say it?
Yep. You got it.
With a new descent line toward Wubba Lubba Dub Dub, which also needs some explanation, to scout for the potential triple link up you were potentially interested in doing. And this is after less than 24 hours at altitude, so it's a pretty ambitious effort. Um, and was this well? It seems ambitious. Was this really ambitious, or is it just how you have to deal with things when you have limited time? Now, before you answer the bigger question,
Yeah.
what's a lollipop route, and
Okay.
what is wubba lubba dub dub?
Okay, so a lollipop, if you think about like the map of a run or a hike or something, so an out and back would just be a line, right? And so a
Yep.
lollipop would be like a line with a circle at the end, and then you
Really?
come back down.
Okay.
So that's what I consider a lollipop.
Okay.
And then Wubba Lubba Dub Dub is a peak that. So there's basically three big peaks right here at Laguna Santa Rosa that are all within a few miles of our little home base here, that you can basically do without driving. I guess you could do more, but it would just be kind of outrageous. And I climbed it the first time maybe like 3 or 4 years ago, and it's the hardest one to get to. And I was looking at a map and it didn't have a name. And I was watching Rick and Morty, the TV show at the time, and that's like a silly phrase from that show, Wubba Lubba Dub Dub, that Rick
Mm-hmm.
says sometimes. And so I
Yep.
was like, oh, this peak has no name. Cool. I'm going to call it Peak Wubba Lubba Dub Dub. And then I found out it's just called like Peak Santa Rosa or something really lame like that. And it was kind of disappointing. So I just kept calling it Wubba Lubba Dub Dub. But anyway, so all the people who come on my trips have been introduced to that peak as Wubba Lubba Dub Dub. But it is actually technically Cerro Santa Rosa, which is less cool. Anyway, to go back to your question about is this really aggressive? I think it's a listening to the body thing, and like we just talked about in the last question, if I'd woken up and my O2 sat had been 78 and my resting heart rate had been, over 60 or something, like to me that would be a sign of like, oh, you're really struggling to adapt and let's take it super easy for a couple days. But the fact that I woke up and felt pretty normal, my body felt well recovered from that big treadmill effort on Monday. I'd slept well, all my sats were good. It was like, okay, cool, let's like just go do something chill. Like the effort was still pretty low. It was a long day and we went up over 5,000 meters, but I like to do that when I first get to altitude is go up a little bit higher and then come down. I think you get a little bit of a quicker adaptation when you do that, I've found. And yeah, and Tim Verbery came with me, and we had a great time. And yeah, it was a great day. So I don't think it was too aggressive. But again, I think it's in the context of paying really close attention to my body, both how I'm feeling and the objective data that I'm getting from my heart rate and oxygen saturation.
Yep. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. Good info for general training is listen to your body and don't ignore the data. Hmm.
That's right.
Okay. Um, and then on Saturday, you went for Tres Cruces Norte, which
Mhm.
I guess is one of these three peaks you were mentioning before.
No, sorry.
6,000
This is a different three peaks. So
different three
yeah,
peaks. Okay. So
so
there's
there's
another three peaks.
these three
Okay.
peaks are like maybe 20 or 30 kilometers away. They're the ones that they're right across the big laguna that our little refugio here sits on. So we're basically at a
Okay.
little campsite, and there's this giant salt flat, which is called Laguna Santa Rosa. And that's the place with, there's flamingos in it. It's really crazy. And right across from that is this giant mountain called Tres Cruces, which is three crosses, is what it's called in Spanish. And it has three summits. And we stare at it like every day, and they're in a perfect line. And to digress for a second, that was back when I got Achilles surgery in December of 2023. The big kind of like first project I did coming back from that, if you remember, Mr. C, was Chris Fisher and I did the complete traverse of
Yep.
the Tres Cruces. So all three of them, which had never been done before. So that was my
Yeah.
first kind of like, all right, I'm back. This is awesome project. And it
Hmm.
was a super mega thing. It was also like the first thing that Chris and I had ever done together. So yeah, so the three peaks here are independent mountains. The Tres Cruces is like one giant, massive thing that has three distinct summits.
Hmm. Okay. And it's 6,030 meters, and it was only your second day up there. So this is a, pretty big mountain.
Yep.
The ascent took you 3 hours, exactly 3 hours, and then you spent almost 2 hours, it sounds like, waiting for Tim Robury at the summit. So tell us what it's like when you have to sit down and wait for somebody at 6,000 meters for that long. And because you talked about your O2 sat and stuff, and your O2 sat was like the mid 80s, which, for
Mm.
most of us would put us in a coma probably. Um,
Mm,
well, maybe not that bad, but we would
yeah.
probably really feel it. So what was it like?
Well, yeah, mid 80s is not terrible actually. Like when we're in the Himalaya, for example, um, when people are getting like rescued off the mountain, their O2 sat is sometimes in the 50s. Um, so that's pretty serious. Um, and for me, yeah, if I'm above 90, I feel pretty normal. If it's below 90, I start to feel a little bit tired. If it's below 80, I feel pretty bad. Has been my experience. So mid 80s is like not great, not terrible. And also, yeah, I'm not definitely not trying to throw shade at Tim. He did great for what it's worth. Like, if anything, you asked if the first day was aggressive. If anything, this day was definitely more aggressive. I think going to 6,000 meters on day two is a pretty big ask. And I'd said like, "Hey Tim, do you want to go do this tomorrow? I'm going to try it." And he was like, "Yeah, sure, I'm game." So, he's definitely less of a mountain trail guy than me. He's more of a flat runner and more of a short distance runner. He was a really good 800-meter runner in college. So he's definitely a little bit farther from his element than me in doing these kind of things. And no, he did awesome. So uh, first off, yeah, just big props to him for getting to over 6,000 meters on his second day up here. So that was pretty cool. And in terms of the kind of just hanging out up there, I honestly think it's a good thing because, usually when you climb a mountain to acclimatize, you only spend maybe 15 minutes on the summit. And so to be able to go up there and breathe that 6,000-meter air for a couple of hours, I think it's probably a really good thing. Your body just gets more time to adapt. And honestly, it,
Uh-huh.
it was a really nice day. It wasn't too windy. The sun was out. It was pretty warm. I had a lot of layers. I was just sitting up there looking at the scenery. There's this beautiful alpine lake. Read my book for a while. Eventually walked around a little bit, but yeah, it was great. Felt really nice.
Nice. Very nice. Okay. So looking back on the week, this crazy whirlwind week that you just went through. So you had the beginning with the massive treadmill session at the Staleys, to immediately traveling, and then to almost immediately, as soon as you got there, going up at altitude and over 6,000 meters. How do you feel? What does this tell you about where your fitness and adaptation are right now?
I think the most interesting thing, like I was saying before, is just how quickly the altitude stuff has come back and felt pretty good. Even on that Tres Cruces day when we went up to 6,000, I definitely felt more. I felt the altitude more there, probably from about 5,500 meters up. I started to feel, okay, this is what altitude is like. That's where it kind of started to hit me, which is funny because like that's just about the altitude of Everest Base Camp, and like I spent a month there in the spring, so they're definitely you definitely lose some of it, especially the really high altitude stuff. That goes away pretty quickly, but I think the kind of like 2,000 to 3,000, even 4,000 meter stuff has felt really good so far, and that's been surprising. And that's part of the reason that I'm here right now, was so that I could basically make sure that I was well enough adapted that I could lead the upcoming trip for Chaski without having to worry about myself and feeling okay at altitude. That's the number one thing when I'm in guide mode, is making sure that that I don't have to worry about myself. That I can really focus on everybody else and not have to think, oh gosh, what if I have a problem, or I get really tired, or I get haste or hape or something like that. So regardless of fitness or anything else, I think that's been the most important thing, is just making sure I feel like my body is strong, healthy, and ready to go for this trip.
Great. Well, I'm glad to hear you're feeling up to it. That's good because you're about to lead it. So it's a good time to be ready.
Yep, sure is.
Okay. So now you've got this Everesting event coming up in a few weeks at the end of December. You're getting good altitude, high altitude exposure here in Chile, and you're starting to think about spring of 2026. So how are you thinking about all this at once and balancing all these different objectives?
I'm trying to not think too far ahead right now. I mean, obviously the big kind of question mark is going back to the Himalaya in the spring and thinking about the real Everest after the treadmill Everest. And that's kind of the only long-term thing I'd say I'm focused on right now. I'm kind of tentatively looking at a couple of objectives maybe in January or February to kind of split up the training block a little bit. But yeah, that's really the longer term focus. But like I said, I think in the last episode and just now, this last couple of months has really been pretty relaxed in terms of having so much structure to every single day and every single week of training leading up to a very singular goal. It's really been more about making sure I'm ready for this trip, feeling like my fitness is moving in the right direction, feeling like my body is healthy and excited to train, and enjoying it, like spending time, running with friends, running in beautiful places. And now I have this fun little treadmill Everesting event that's going to be an interesting challenge and should be a really fun event overall. So right now I think it feels more like exercise is something that I get to do and enjoy the feeling of being fit and being able to go out and do cool stuff in the mountains with my friends. And that's kind of the best possible scenario. And I know that, if I do go back to the Himalaya, there's going to be plenty of time to buckle down and have a little bit more structure and self-imposed pressure to make sure that I'm ready for that and putting my absolute best foot forward fitness wise and preparation wise. So for now, it's really more about trying to make sure that I'm enjoying the process and just staying fit and staying healthy.
Okay. All right. That's the end of my questions. Anything you want to add?
No, I think that's good. Let's cut it and we'll come back for our cool down.
Okay, this week's cool down, we're going to talk about what you're about to do, Camp Chaski, Atacama. So let's talk about where you actually are this week. Camp Chaski, Atacama is in the high desert of Chile. So for listeners who might not have heard you talk about this place before, can you paint the picture of what this location is like?
I can try. It's a it's a unique place. I mean, if you're on YouTube, I guess I will spin my camera around. Maybe you can see out the window here. Oh, it's just really bright. That's too bad.
Yeah, not
Well, that's
much
how
that
bright the
way.
sun
Too
is. There
bright.
it goes. Okay.
There you
See,
go.
just a little for a second.
It's
Anyways,
pretty hard.
you're better off going onto my Instagram page or something, or just Googling this. But so where we are in the Atacama Desert is a section called the Puna, Puna, which is essentially a high plateau up in the Atacama Desert. So we are kind of in north central Chile, kind of halfway between Santiago and the southern border of Peru. The closest town is a town called Copiapó, which is kind of a blue collar mining town in the middle of the Atacama Desert. It's about 50 miles from the coast, and it's a small oasis town. So there's a literal oasis there. That's why it became a place at some point in in history. And since then, it's developed as kind of the hub of the mining industry, which is the big industry in this part of the country. Once you drive about 1 mile out of Copiapó, you are in the middle of the Atacama Desert. And so we drive about 100 miles up here to the Puna. And this plateau, we are at 3,800 meters, which is about just under 13,000 feet, I think. And so everything just goes up from there. So this is the low point, is at 13,000 feet, which is about, pretty close to the top of the Rockies. And here we have what we were talking about in the main episode, what we call the Refugio Maricunga, which is this kind of, what would you describe it? It's kind of like a campsite. There's a couple small buildings, but it's basically a bunch of tent spots and maybe 3 small buildings that have very basic kind of bunk beds and things like that in them. And this is like by far the most developed campsite in the entire region of the Puna. So this is where our trip is based, and then we will go out and do day trips. And to try and kind of paint a picture again of where we are, I'm currently looking out over a giant salt flat. So that is why this region is a big plateau, is there used to be a big body of water here. Now it's all receded, and what we have left is a big salt flat. And there's a little bit of water. It's obviously very salty water, so you don't drink it. We can't swim in it. It's very shallow, and it is full of 3 different species of flamingo, believe it or not, that live up here in the high Atacama Desert. And they
That
eat
is crazy.
whatever little tiny microorganisms are in the water. And that's one of the few very odd wild animals that we have up here. Beyond that, we have Wanakos, which are kind of wild llama. Those live in big herds up here, and they're really pretty. And Vicuñas, which are really small wild llamas as well. And then obviously we have Steve, if you are familiar. Steve is a bird. Really, Steve is a synecdoche for a whole species of bird, which is the carenulated caracara, otherwise known as the curiquingue, which is he's a black and white falcon, and he lives here in the high desert. He also lives near Quito, which is, Steve and I, we go way back. So it's a very remote place, not a lot going on in terms of human infrastructure, but it is one of the most epic, beautiful landscapes I've ever been to. And to me, the thing that makes it really special is there's almost no one here. So unlike some of the other really breathtaking places I've been, like the Himalaya or the Andes of Peru, where you have a lot of infrastructure and thus a lot of tourism, here we have so many mountains. They're quite accessible, and there's almost no one here. So it's just amazing.
Cool. And two questions then. How did you find it? And what keeps you coming back there?
So I found it kind of coincidentally. I think it was in 2020 during COVID. I was looking at the fastest known time, the FKT website. And on that site, I think it's the homepage, they basically have a big map with like these orange dots, and each orange dot is a route somewhere on Earth, and you can zoom in and out and see. And I was basically just looking at stuff in South America someday, and I found this speed record route on a mountain called Ojos del Salado, which I'd never heard of, but it turns out it's the second tallest mountain in the Americas. It's this, which is also the second tallest mountain outside of Asia, and it's 6,893 meters, I think about 22,600 feet, and it's here in this region. So that was
Wow.
the original thing that brought me here, was Ojos, was this big, huge mountain and this speed record. And my friend Scott Penfield and I came here on this wild trip in 2020, kind of right as COVID was starting to open up travel a little bit, and just had this unbelievable adventure, and totally fell in love with the place. And like I was saying before, just the fact that it felt so wild and so empty. I think that was the thing that really appealed to me, because I'd been in really beautiful mountainous places before, but I'd never been anywhere that just felt so like like it sounds cheesy, but this sense of freedom, in that there was no one there, and we just basically had a big truck and we were driving around the desert. Like, that was it. We could just kind of point somewhere and be like, all right, we're going to go over there. We're going to climb that mountain. There's nothing between us and the top of it. So we're just going to walk up until we get there. And that's kind of how it goes here sometimes. And I've never been anywhere else like that.
Okay. And this is your third or fourth time already, right? Bringing groups up there with Camp Atacama, Chaski?
Yeah, I think this will be our fourth trip that we've done kind of like as an organized thing through Chaski. The first couple of trips up here, it was just me and my friends, and we were pursuing kind of personal projects. And yeah, the last couple of trips, usually there's a combination of that. So this trip as well, I'm here for a week or so beforehand with a friend, doing my own training and kind of fun stuff, and then 10 days leading those trips afterwards. And that's been a really, really fun way to come back here. Is, I usually try and do something a little bit different each year when I'm here by myself. And then once people are here, I really enjoy sharing this place that has been so special and beautiful and magical to me with other people who, most of them have never experienced anything like this, because like there's basically nowhere else like this on Earth. And so just seeing people react to this place it's really joyful for me.
Great. Great. Sounds very special. Um, okay. So, and that's a good segue to my next question. So you've talked a little bit before on occasion about how guiding, leading groups and things fits into your life as an athlete. So how does your mindset change when you're here as a guide? And like this week, you're there with Tim, and then next week with a full contingent for the Camp Chaski, versus when you're there purely as an athlete training on your own objectives? And how do you balance those roles when there overlaps?
Well, I think that for me, it's a really nice balance, because being an athlete is inherently selfish. You're really focused on yourself and your goals and your training and what you're doing from day to day. And I think that being able to take a step back from that and focusing on someone else's goals or a group of people's goals and their experience and their positive, transformation and their safety and all these other things. To me, that is very grounding, and I enjoy doing that. I think the thing that's important pragmatically from a career perspective is making sure that I do the work ahead of time so that I balance these things in, a macro level scheduling wise, so that it's at a time of year where it makes sense, where I can say, okay, I don't need to focus on my own training and have that be the only thing I'm worried about. And but it's not going to interrupt. It's not going to become a problem 6 months from now. And
Hmm.
I think we were talking about this at the end of the regular episode recording, where right now that's exactly where I want to be. That's why I scheduled this trip a year ago. And I am kind of thinking a year ahead in terms of big macro level planning, because I know, okay, usually December is a pretty good time to be doing something like this because it's usually after my fall season and before my spring season. And so it allows me to really take that step back and do something that to me is really meaningful, which is taking a bunch of people who have never been to a place like this, can't imagine it, and helping them have a really positive experience here, like I had my first few times. But hopefully I can make it a little bit easier for them, because they have someone who's been here, who knows the place, and who can, help sand off some of the rougher edges maybe, and make it a little bit more comfortable and a little bit more enjoyable, versus, the first time when Scott and I were here, when we were kind of trying to figure everything out on our own and like having all this car trouble and, eating canned tuna and ramen every day, which, there's a lot of funny stories there, and there's a lot of fun in that. But at the same time, I think I've grown comfortable enough in this place that I feel like I know how to make people feel really at home and comfortable in a place that is objectively very far from home, literally and figuratively.
Hmm. Yeah. And in fact, I'm curious about these mountains around Laguna Santa Rosa. And I remember that trip all the way back when with Scott. Um, so you have these mountains, Ojos del Salado, Tres Cruces, and the many others, all 6,000-meter peaks. So these are serious mountains. But at this point, they're sort of old friends because you've been there a few times and you've run up and down them. So what's it like to have that level of knowledge, that level of intimacy in a place that's so, as you said, far from home, so remote, and most people are never going to get there?
I was just talking to a friend about this exact topic, about what I enjoy most about guiding or leading trips. And I think for me, the thing that is the most rewarding is when I feel like I can offer something to people that they're not going to get anywhere else. They're not going to get it from reading Reddit. They're not going to get it from a guidebook. They're not going to get it from just hiring a random local guide. And you have to have an intimate knowledge of a place. Like you said, you have to just spend a lot of time in a place exploring and having adventures, running specifically for me and the clients I work with often, or hiking or exploring on foot, things like that. And, there's only a handful of places in the world that I think I have that kind of knowledge, places like Quito or this region. Now I feel like I have that knowledge. I've probably done more running, I've probably run more actual miles, like running miles in this region than like anyone on earth, I would guess. Just because so few people come up here and run. And so I've just been able to see an awful lot of the place. And I'm not trying to say that there aren't guides, even like Vanessa, my co-leader. She's a local and she's been guiding in this region for, 15, 20 years, and knows so much about everything. And, she has her own wealth of knowledge. I think what I'm saying is I've got this kind of very niche specific knowledge, which is, seeing it from a bipedal viewpoint, if that makes sense. Um, and so, yeah, I think that is what, to go back to your question, that's the thing that I think makes me feel the most fulfilled and joyful when I'm leading a trip, is knowing that I have something that I've gained just through my experience and being able to share that. The analogy I've used before is, it's like being a little kid again, and I get to show my friends my favorite toy or my pet or my favorite movie or something that they've never seen before. It's like bringing some crazy thing into kindergarten and being like, check this out, you're not going to believe it. And then you pull out your pet tortoise or whatever, right? Like, whoa, like that's kind of how I feel like bringing people to Laguna Santa Rosa, is like, yeah, there's flamingos, there's like giant mountains, it's amazing. And just yeah, being able to walk up a hill and like point to all the peaks and be like, that's that one, and you can climb this from there, and you can make this big loop this way, and all these things. I think back to when I've had really powerful experiences on the other end of that, like hanging out with Jim Walmsley in Flagstaff and having him show me all these trails and pointing out you can link this to that and this to that. And again, his passion showed so much to, it just it his I guess his knowledge showed his passion is what I'm trying to say, and the way that he
Hmm.
explained things, his passion was just, it was palpable. And I feel like that's what I hope to get across with people who come here, is that it's a really beautiful, special place, and for me it's been really transformative. And that's my hope for people when they come to this place, is not just that it's beautiful and that they climb some mountains, but that they're able to be in a place that's really different and use that as an opportunity to step outside of their normal like thinking patterns and life patterns, even if it's just for a week and a half, because I think you can really change your life that way, by making those kind of adjustments. So now I'm getting all high horsey and soapboxy, but but it's true, I think, and that's really my kind of biggest takeaway that I want people to have from this trip, is not just, again, that it's beautiful and that it's really hard to do this stuff and it's exciting, but that the pace of life's just, everything is so different. And when you're in a place that's really different, that is, I think, the best time to look at the patterns that you have in your quote unquote normal life, your day-to-day life, and see, are there things about that you want to change? So that's a very long-winded and slightly soapboxy answer about yeah, what it's like to kind of have intimate knowledge of this place and share it with others.
That's great. And your passion certainly comes out when you talk about it that way. So I'm
Well,
sure the
thank
camp
you.
will be
I hope
great.
so.
Um, then another thing that's unique among the many about you is the different places now that you've spent at altitude and training and guiding. So you've been in Quito, Ecuador, in Flagstaff, Colorado, in the United States, the Himalaya, of course, Peru, and now where you are here in Atacama in Chile. So somebody asked you, came up to you and said, where should they go for their first serious altitude training block, or just for a very cool holiday who likes, being up high and that kind of stuff?
Hmm.
What would you tell them? Would you send them to Chile, or what kind of person might you send to the Atacama Desert?
That's a good question. Well, it's kind of two different questions. So the first one about, let's take them as a person who wants to do altitude training, like as a runner, and a person who wants to just experience a cool high altitude place.
Mm-hmm.
I think for
Yep.
altitude training, unless you're training for something incredibly specific, like climbing in the Himalaya or climbing here in the Andes, then coming here, exactly here where I am in Chile, in the high Atacama, it's a very harsh environment. I'll be honest. Like, I come up here for 7 to 10 days at a time, and then I have to go down for a few days. There's no running water here. We don't shower for 7 days. Like we bring all of our food up here, all of our gas up here, all of our water up here. It's a tough place. So and it's also really high from an altitude training perspective, 3,800 meters, which again, that's the lowest we ever are. It's too high to train if you're a marathon runner. So that said, don't, like, I'm not trying to dissuade people from coming here, because like I said, it's one of the coolest places on earth. And if you come, like, obviously you should come with us because we have the best time. but um, if you're talking about where should I go for, an 8-week training stint to go PR in the marathon, then this is not the right answer. Chile is for the person who really wants to explore a high altitude place that is way, way off the beaten path. That is just, it is the remoteness, the sparseness, the vastness of the landscape. Those are the things that are unique about this area. The altitude itself, I think, makes everything challenging, and it's what shapes the area. It's what makes it look the way it does. It's what makes the wildlife so crazy. Um, and you definitely will get really fit here. I always feel really good when I go down, but it's not the kind of place, like I said, to come do a 2-month marathon training block. I think it's more for someone who's looking to just get somewhere that's super different pace of life, and a really unique and special kind of beauty that I have not found anywhere else on Earth. In terms of the altitude training block, the series, like, kind of amateur to serious level athlete that wants to go to train it, somewhere for, let's say, a month or two. Gosh, I mean, like, I'm partial to keto. I think keto is great. It's a little bit high for some people at 9,000 feet, but it's great in that you have high-low training. So you can go from keto down to about 7,000 feet in like a 15-minute drive. You can also go up to like 4,000 meters on a cable car. So you can get a lot of different altitudes. The weather's really good all year. The cost of living is really low. There's good places to run. So I love keto. That's kind of my, maybe not typical answer. If you're in the States and you want to stay closer, I honestly don't think there's a better place in America than Flagstaff. I lived there on and off for a couple of years. There's a reason it's become, the hot spot for runners. It's just, I have never been in a place, at least in the United States, that even comes close in terms of the amount of soft surfaces that you have to run on: dirt roads, really nice trails, really technical trails, super smooth stuff, flat stuff, tracks, grass, like everything. You can go down to Sedona in like 45 minutes and get lower. You can go all the way to Phoenix if it's really bad weather in like an hour and a half. And then for trail runners, you have, Mount Elbert and Humphrey right there. So I think if you're staying domestically, I don't think there's a better place than Flag. The Colorado runners might hate me for it, but I think it's true. I'm partial to Arizona. I really love it there. It's beautiful. And yeah, if you're looking abroad, I'd say keto is a great spot, especially for Americans. It's super close to the States, really easy to get to. And yeah, if you're looking for like a super epic high altitude, just, trip, I'd say here in Chile or the other side of the world would be, the Himalaya. It doesn't get more epic than the Himalaya.
Okay. Well, I hope the participants in your trip have a fantastic time. I'm sure they will, and the whole thing goes really well. Anything else you want to add here?
Thank you. No, I think that's good. I'm super excited. We have a great group coming down. And yeah, by the time this is going live, our trip will have just started. So if you're not, make sure you follow me and Chaski on Instagram. Chaski's account, I think, is chaski.endurance. We do have a pro photographer coming on our trip, one of our staff members. So he'll be in charge of all of the photo and video and uploading all that stuff. So you guys will get a sense of what it looks like out here. So yeah, check out my account. I think some of it will go up there, but definitely check out the chaski.endurance account on Instagram, and you'll get a really good look at exactly what it looks like up here. Excellent. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. I will read us out. Please, as always, send us any feedback, your questions, comments, concerns, hopes, dreams. You can send those to my email, ty@chaski.run, or DM me on Instagram at Tyler C. Andrews. Remember, you can read my raw training logs on my blog at tylercandrews.com and get that delivered to your inbox via Substack at tylercandrews.substack.com. Ty's Training is a Chaski Media production and brought to you by the good folks at the Chaski Foundation, the world's only nonprofit supporting coaching, travel, and community for endurance athletes. Ooh, it's hard to get that out in one breath up here. Thanks, everybody, for listening, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.